Hi there. Caught us laughing. Good place to begin. Very excited again to start the week with Karl Dakin. We're focused on community funding, development primarily funding, and Karl's in the midst of really trying to take a great initiative forward and something that could have huge relevance and implication in the landscape out there, especially as relates to cities who are looking to diversify and become more rejuvenated through their development. Chat's open. We depend on chat and always look forward to comments and thoughts that we can take and return value and give you some quality takeaways. So with that, I'll turn it over to Karl, who can get us up to date and really kind of dig right in or dive right into community development funding. Karl.
Well, thank you, Don. It's always good to be a guest on your show. As most people who know me, I talk about funding. I have my own LinkedIn live show on Tuesday mornings at 8 o'clock. I also do a daily and weekly newsletter on raising funding. And one of my areas of, I'll call it preference or focus, is at the community level. And to try to describe that, what we're talking about is quite often you'll see someone say, I'm going to raise money for a business, or I'm going to raise money for a charity, or I'm going to raise it for a new park in a community. And these are all one type of funding, but they're singular. There's only one element to them. And as good as these efforts are, quite often we've found that we've had the phrase on the show, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go as a community, go as a crowd. And this, there's a lot of I will call it good thought, but not necessarily science. It's still too much of an art form of how do you do more than one project at a time so that you create a complementary or synergistic type of effect. And what we have seen in this group that is coming together, and we're probably going to be filing our paperwork this week for a group now called RCI Community Funds, is that if you look at all the good work that people try to do, it tends to be singular and it doesn't get that complementary effect. And so it doesn't get energy or help or financial support from the other projects. And that means that it moves slower, it has less outcome, less impact, and it has a higher failure rate. And so what we're trying to do when we talk about community funding as we're approaching it is we're saying we want a number of activities all to happen at the same time that are intentionally designed to work with each other, to help each other, and thereby create enough what you would call traction or economic momentum that a community that is on the downturn or is basically they call underserved or distressed economically can grab hold and start pulling themselves back up. So at the community level, you have to understand what a micro ecosystem looks like with the different parts that are there. And if you can do that, then at this point, and we're still kind of guessing our way through this, even though we've got like 150 years of experience on our team, is how do you take stuff that people know, but put it together in a slightly different fashion that gets this combination result instead of the singular result? And if we can do that successfully, then our goal is to help all communities that are in this underserved capacity, this status, turn around and try to start building themselves back. And there's tens of thousands of those communities. So on one hand, we're very focused on getting our first demonstration project up and running. And at the same time, we're looking to how do we scale by replication? How can we make what we learn available the day after we learn it instead of coming at this a year or two down the road?
So, what makes this a good time and place for an initiative like this relative to what people have used in the past or maybe use as something that's traditional or something that's kind of tried and true, how is this a optimization of that type of funding effort?
To the timing on this, there have been underserved communities since the beginning of urban areas, and in fact, now we're seeing more and more rural areas meet the definition of underserved. Their primary industry has either disappeared entirely, or it's on a downturn, and they need to bring in new industry, new jobs, with jobs being core, no matter where you go. But you'll see a lot of programs out there. They'll go, well, we want to build housing. And you go, great, housing is needed. It's in a crisis. But if there are no people with jobs to pay the rents on that housing, then the housing project can't really move forward. It may never move forward at all. And then people go, yeah, but to get, have somebody with a job, you got to have a business. And if you don't have the business, then there can't be the job. And oh, by the way, the person that you need to hire in that business, it's a different skill set. It's something that the person doesn't have. So you have to have workforce training in order to take the person who is going to work for the new business, who's now can pay rents to pay for the housing. And you can see how this circular loop has to work with each other. It has to be kind of designed to maximize efficiency. Because if you start a business over here, but they can't hire one because there's no skills because of lack of training, or there's no business because of lack of housing, it gets into chicken and egg scenario. And we've seen this a lot. Then stuff doesn't happen. And what we have seen in the past is people who have made really good effort at this have been very good at one of these elements, but very rarely do you see two of the elements, and almost never three or four of the elements all working together at the same time. So when we talk about community funding, we're talking about economic development at its very core. This village, this town community came together for some reason because jobs were out there that allowed the people to move into the community, get a job, buy housing, and now we had the economy up and running. But because some job disappeared, whether it was the shipyard, down the road, or it was the mining company up the hill, now we have to make a shift in jobs in order to make everything else work. So jobs end up being, in my mind, the core, but sometimes you have to create a brand new business in order for that job to be there. And with technology, there's an opportunity to do that, but then you have to bring the training. The job can't just exist in a vacuum. It requires the ability to bring people up to speed to bear the cost of that cost of training until the company becomes profitable. Then hopefully, with roots in the community, with housing, with jobs and people, everything gets going.
Okay, I think that puts it in really cool perspective. We've got Jason Gerardo being our first commenter today. I always know it's Jason because his name doesn't show up or picture, so it's either him or Carrie, but without a joke, I kind of default to Jason, and I checked it out, and it truly is Jason. Jason's a wonderful colleague on LinkedIn, appears on the show here with Dave Snell, usually every other Wednesday, and then has been coming together with Kelly Stanecki on Thursdays. One Path Coaching is Jason's business, so I recommend make a connection if there's some like-mindedness there, and Jason's a quality person that I'll vouch for. With that said, moving back to the topic of the day, I guess what you have in every community is differences in communities. Some are fast growing, some are very profitable, if you can call that for a community. Others are kind of stagnant, and then others are in decline. And I guess, to all communities, what could every community do in relationship to your planned program that could support existing businesses? So it's not always starting from fresh and bringing in new blood, but really working with what's there in addition to bringing in new, and maybe what's there to build incentives to businesses who are doing very well. So maybe distress isn't a key qualifier as much as, being able to personalize or individualize attention and support for all types of businesses that can be leveraged. And naturally, when there's opportunity, I think there has to be comprehensive approach to it, because I know growing up in Detroit, living in Detroit, seeing it go from the fastest growing city in the world in 1950 to the poster child for what happens when everything goes wrong and everybody decides to leave at the same time. Uh, and it's starting to happen now. Some of these things take time because of the churn from going from good to bad, and now having land that's giveaway land, people who are hardworking, uh, people who are looking for work and really appreciate getting a quality job after being either denied or having to compete too dramatically for that. And the schools, the fire department, the police department, the safety. I guess it's how do you carve things up in a way that's a better, let's say, opportunity for all those involved. I think part of it is you need an ethical administration or government in some of these cities who have had some challenges to leadership and to keeping things on the up and up. And here's Kerry with his joke, must have heard us talking. The son and farmer were outside, and the son asked the farmer why the cows always ate the church grass. The farmer said that the church's grass must taste divine. Okay. Here's another one from Carrie that says, took me a while to get back on. I have a 13-year-old computer, and when it doesn't want to work, it just won't go. And I had to tell it was going to get my hammer, and then it worked. Well, sometimes talking does make a difference, even if it's to a machine. And I guess in the future, more machines will be talking to us. But on the community development side, I think reestablishing the pride in the community, bringing back some of the history and making it more fun, right? Making it more attractive. And it could be community events. It could be a lot of things, but I think what you're trying to do, Karl, is a little bit more visible and something that's actionable, because everybody can start with great intentions and flowery language, but it really comes down to when the rubber meets the road, is the investment a good investment for all the parties? So how do you try to balance it among all the shareholders to build on that and hopefully project that on a larger screen?
Yeah, so I have a joke for Carrie, but I'll save it for a little bit later. I heard it over the weekend, and it was the perfect Carrie type joke. That's a teaser, Carrie. Just hang in there, and you'll hear it later. Uh, but it's a complex situation. Every community is different because of the people that reside there. But the if you want to call it core economic things are going to be consistent from one community to the next. So you have to have some formulas that we're going to follow, at least as a starting point, where we're going to try to raise money, put that money into a fund that's dedicated to a single community. That money, according to law, in order to avoid massive regulation, 60% will be invested into real estate and 40% will be invested in local businesses. Now, within the real estate, we're going to put it into thirds. 1/3 will go into residential, 1/3 will go into commercial buildings, and 1/3 will go into community buildings. And to the question you asked about a community coming together identifying itself as a community, having that commonality of being all part of a community. This is one contribution towards that point, which is to have a community center where people can meet. There may be common programs. We may put a daycare center in there, a coffee shop, to help people mix and talk and see each other. It's a place to host events that are all benefit anyone who's a resident of the community. So there's a physical element and a number of activities related to that. Then, as you and I have talked, Don, we're going to try to install some common communication channels where everybody can know what's going on. They're not dependent upon a newspaper that's published at the center of town, 40 miles away, that never talks about anything in the community except maybe the bad news. And there are a number of different online services out there that do some of this. So we may promote some of those as well, but we probably will set up a LinkedIn live streaming show just for each community, and then have community leaders and people who are helping or supporting or participating in all the things we're doing guest on that show, so that people kind of get the news on what's happening in economic development in their backyard, and they'll be given both news and invitations to participate in some level. Then, as we're raising money to put into the community through regulation crowdfunding, the first wave or first tier of that will be focused on people within the community, primarily so that if they can invest in this fund, the profits from the fund will stay in the community. They won't be exported out of the community, which happens whenever you have certain types of housing projects or a big box store, where they may be providing jobs, and they may be giving you access to products and services you need and want. But at the end of the day, the profits leave the community almost entirely, if not entirely, and that weakens the community. It's not growing as a community because the wealth is being extracted from the community over time. So there are going to be lots of models and submodels and sub-submodels to try to say the money goes here for this reason, it has a purpose, and this is how it interacts within the community to help the community, in effect, regain its identity, regain its brand, so people can understand how they can benefit from the community and contribute to the community, and communicate this in a consistent fashion, so people don't feel they're disenfranchised, they're left out. Because a lot of governments, the government's over there and the neighborhood's here. And you're going, well, the problem why this is an underserved neighborhood is 20 other neighborhoods got priority before this neighborhood did. And by the time they got to this neighborhood, they ran out of money. And it happens all the time everywhere. They just, there isn't enough money for everybody all the time. So when you get into the lottery of who goes first and who gets the money, if you don't get it, then you're on your own. And that's where we're trying to deal with communities as we find them, is what can we do to help them basically take control of their economic situation, and turn it around and put it in the right direction with enough forward momentum that they can build on that over time.
Okay, well, it sounds like there's quite a balancing act that goes on based on identifying where investment makes the most sense. And, also because we're talking about communities, every community has developed based on where they began, what's transpired since then, and what has that allowed them to become. Some continue to flourish. I mean, we happen to be in Colorado, which seems to be on a fast track, and more people are moving in, more people are seeing housing increase, which then increases tax revenues, which then allows municipalities to invest back into the communities to make them more attractive. So it seems like success breeds more success in this whole process. At the same time, a lot of things have taken long-term planning, but now are affected by short-term situations because of the dynamic change that takes place. Again, going back to Michigan, it's getting more attractive because property is so inexpensive. So you could buy a house there for half the price you could maybe in Colorado. If you do have a job that's remote, it really doesn't matter. Where before, if you wanted to work in advertising or fashion or art, New York would be the magnet. But because of that, the cost of living in New York is so high that if you can still do the work and do it remotely, you can afford to live pretty much anywhere. And it doesn't have to be urban, it could be somewhere on a lake, it could be somewhere rural. And I think uh, municipalities or communities need to kind of figure what is their most attractive feature, right? Because all things being equal, a person would rather, I think, live in the Sun Belt than the Rust Belt, just for weather and just for the newness of it. And at the same time, there's tradition, there's a lot of cultural opportunities in older cities that have great art museums and things of that nature. I guess it takes a visionary in the community or someone leading that community to identify the nuances between what we've been offering. And I guess just like anybody else who makes an investment, they have to see what was the plan, what was the result, what's the next step. If it's been successful, and hopefully it's self-generating or perpetuating, that if you invest something, that investment goes beyond just the investment and starts to spread through whatever the initiatives or businesses were. And, I think it's also having the people in the community support the community. There's always been a push for buy local, support individual business people. And I think that has been challenged because the big have been beaten the small over time. But now I think the smart are going to be beating the big because now they can associate with something bigger themselves. As an example, someone who's selling out of their own storefront, if they had to pack, ship, inventory, and everything else, would have been a tremendous disadvantage. But by tying into companies like Etsy or Amazon, where all you have to do is ship the product to them and then they take care of distribution, they take care of marketing, they take care of all that. Well, that puts the person who's a solopreneur in a better position. And those companies are going out of their way to solicit more and more vendors, make it easier. Some are providing financing. I remember early on in e-commerce, UPS was a big proponent of e-commerce because they were a shipping giant. So the more they could have people ship their product versus sell to retail or through retail channels was a benefit. And they created a venture capital arm that invested in UPS clients only. For a long time, it was primarily companies that could support what UPS was doing. So in other words, companies who made machines that UPS or robots or, so in other words, it would be part of the UPS program, but then they came up with financing. So if you wanted to do import export, they would take care of certain things for you. They would take care of the paperwork and the red tape. So I think it's really, digging a little deeper on everybody's side to see who's there, what are they doing now, and how does that now change the equation for people who are doing things that maybe aren't as efficient or can't scale as well, and now can focus on core competency. And in a lot of cases, it's the soft skills that people need help with. Like, how do you do it? Do you have people in economic development who will help people get better bookkeeping or get experts who can support them. So I think that's important too, just throwing money and not having that backup or that support, because everybody who's successful creates the blueprint for people to come after them. And if you can get a return on your money, you can reuse that money. If money just goes out and doesn't come back, it really impedes progress and success. And there are many great stories. I mean, but it takes, I think, a partnership. I refer to what the Ford Motor Company has done with a part of Detroit to create this new tech, let's say, campus that put in place because nobody else was going to come up with $1 billion. And it took 6 years of deploying that $1 billion to create, to open the project, and now they have to support it. Alan's here. Alan says, I'm not sure about this, need a primary for the first 6 in Constellation 15-minute communities. Disney Old Money has interest. Well, that's important to have interest, and it's really having faith in whoever it is that's at the driving the parade. Beverly's here. Can't say enough about Beverly. She'll be with me tomorrow with a wonderful lady, Miriam Zeibelgleit. I think I pronounced it well. Beverly's a therapist up in Montreal, has done pretty much every Tuesday for about 6 or 7 months, and it's just an outstanding colleague and somebody that really I've learned so much from, and I'm so proud and honored to be working with. Miriam happens to be an MD who emigrated from Peru, I think it is, and now has her own practice out there. With that said, it seems like you can kind of pick anywhere you want for what you're intending to do because everybody needs it. And I guess is where is the lowest hanging fruit, and how do you get the biggest bang for your buck when you make it happen in that community that you choose?
First, I want to reach out to Carrie and tell Carrie directly that I'm going to be sending out a lot of emails today, and they're all on the topic of meat. Okay, but just ignore them because they're all spam. Okay. Anyway,
that's a good one.
I heard that. My first thought was Carrie. It was just, as soon as I heard it, go, that sounds like Carrie told me that one. But the need is everywhere. They're just communities. It's a natural thing. You have ongoing changes occurring. There was like a crossroads, way back when, and somebody stopped their wagon, got out, put up a store. Next thing, this thing has become 5 stores and a bunch of hotels and a bunch of other things. It becomes a village, but it's dependent upon something, trade or an industry or something that's there. Well, as those industries change over time, such as in Detroit, they had the automobile industry, and then that one got knocked in, on its butt, and then they're in a recovery phase that's going to take a long time. So in those situations, for those situations, you're going, well, what else can we do? And so, as you pointed out, now we can work from anywhere. So when you're doing a new economic model today, you're going, well, if everybody who can is living in the mountains next to a lake with trout fly rod on their front deck before they go to work in the morning, how do I, as an inner city underserved community, how can I make that person part of my community? How can I make them do something? Because they're paying taxes in a different location. They're not paying them in the backyard. There's no one in your yard to pay for the police, the firemen, the street improvements, the other things like that. So we have a very different shifting situation now. And you're going to say, well, certain people who are freelancers or who can work on their own anywhere in the world, they may not be anybody we can really service. And we certainly, are getting tax revenue from them. So how do we go forward? So we're looking at businesses as we describe it in a classical economic form that come together in a community and they export products and services to other communities because that means they're building wealth in the community by bringing in the revenue from their sales, and they help pay for the taxes. But the amenities you put in your community may be different than that. You may say, well, okay, if I want to have artists in my community, I do the community center with a gallery, but I need to have places where they can work. So maybe I get a warehouse that's been abandoned, we convert it into a multiple studios. If I'm working with a different group, like I want to get a bunch of IT programmers who may never come out of their house, and that's a stigma, but we'll stay with this story for a moment. Then you want to have high speed internet. You want the fastest internet possible. You want all the things that go with that so that they can work from their home and know that this community is safe. They want to be able to say, if I get up at 2 in the morning, I take a break for work. I want to run over out and get a cup of coffee or pick up a burrito. I don't worry about stepping down the street because it's absolutely safe. So you start rethinking, what does the city of the future got to look like under this new paradigm? What kind of jobs are going to be there in the future that we have to prepare for, we have to support and recruit to come into the community? Now, at some point, you do have existing businesses. You have to say, is this a coffee shop where all we have to do is just keep the doors open? Or is it some business where we're going to have to change, from a retail outlet to, as you described it, working with fulfillment offices and other services to do that? So it's in a constant change because of technology, because of industries and markets. But at the end of the day, it's down to businesses that provide good paying jobs that can allow somebody to buy a house and build wealth in that manner. They can now invest in the local businesses. So we create multiple ways for them to build wealth. And by doing this, we're going to create these nodes, as you would say, in a network that have their own strength. And then we start, getting better where we can start connecting the links between those. So there's no way to describe this as less than a complicated situation, but coming at it, a little better recognition of what works and doesn't work, things that have to be built to work together from day one as a community, then we think we have an opportunity to bring money into that community to support whatever money's not locally, help get it organized, take available of all the partners, all the turnkey programs, and everything that's out there, but just help weave them together to make a better tapestry for that particular community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, I guess partnership is a key word because, to give an example, my wife's family is from a small little town in Pennsylvania, and it was known for its coal mining. It was in the Allegheny Mountains, and it was, created those hard assets that Pittsburgh and cities around it needed, like bricks and all that kind of stuff. And over time, coal mining kind of has slipped quite a bit. And the industries that were founded for that, let's say, city 150 years ago, has kind of run its course. But at the same time, it's right off of a highway, major highway. And Walmart decided to come in and create a distribution center. And all of a sudden, you had thousands of jobs showed up instantly, good paying jobs with a hardworking workforce who was used to hard work and not making a lot. So, you didn't have to have a lot of union issues. You had a plentiful workforce that was well trained, and that made all the difference. Now, I'm sure whatever city attracted that distribution center came at the expense of other cities who didn't, that could have been 30, 40 miles down the road. And I think it's a challenging balance because there's plenty of cases where cities or states or the federal government has invested and seen nothing come out of it, or not as much as they should have. So, it's a high stakes game. And really, how do you, to what I think is a benefit to what you're doing, create something that's duplicatable, right? So it's not this city won and that city lost, right? This city won and now this city's learning how to do the same thing. And plus, I think the other thing is just like a balance sheet. Start figuring out what your assets are for your community, what the untold secrets are that might be interesting to people. What are the challenges? What makes people not want to go into certain places or do business in certain cities? And I think reliability goes a long way, right? If people are going to make long-term investments, especially their time and their career, is something going to change next year? Does a new administration make a change and all of a sudden someone's halfway down the road and the road switched on them? And really getting the people, and I think you take that into consideration to support their neighborhoods, right? There's no sense starting a business and owning it, and then you go out shopping 10 miles away when you want to buy something. And I know it's a hard thing for people to say, well, I could have saved $1 by buying it there, but I could save a job or support my neighborhood. In a way, it's a way of giving on your own instead of letting your tax dollars speak for you. And I think getting people better makes everything better for everybody around them. So what's your thoughts with all those thoughts, Karl?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The presidential debates last week obviously stirred the political discussion across the board. And in our group, RCI Community Funds, we asked ourselves, would it make a difference if one side or the other prevailed in the upcoming presidential election or even at the state and local elections? And because we're using a for-profit sustainable model as opposed to one that's dependent upon government subsidies or to some degree dependent upon charitable contributions, it shouldn't make that much difference to us. We know lots of programs out there that may just completely disappear depending upon who's in office and what they're advocating for and what their agenda is. And it isn't necessarily that the agenda is good or bad, it's a difference of preferences. And we're back to there's not enough money for everyone all the time. So we're going to be trying to bring money into the community, but we want to marry or tie that to local money as much as possible. And then each thing that we invest in, it has to pay for itself. It can't be a one and done. It can't be look at me, look what we did today, and then tomorrow it disappears because it doesn't have that capability of paying for itself. So we're into this very fundamental, I'll call it conservative investment principles while we're trying to do high social impact at the same time and trying to bring these two different, sometimes opposing thoughts together to make something happen. As we talk with the communities, the first thing we have to do is we have to come up with a plan. What can we do with whatever money we raise into the fund that's available to us? What can we leverage by using off-the-shelf different funding sources? What jobs can we create with turnkey things like a franchise that might come into town that had no presence or no local business that we are competing with? That create these jobs, and we pull this together and go, this is the plan for this community. Now in the next community, it may look like the process is the same, should be the same, but we may find that there's a couple local businesses that we want to amplify. We may find that a different out-of-town business we can bring in than one we brought in the last community because it's a better fit. But at the end of the day, everything pays for itself with enough profit left over to reward the investors for putting their money at risk in this effort, but also enough money to make this fund an evergreen fund, one that continues to invest over time, that can build and grow itself as a source of funding so that you can do more projects and bigger projects over time.
Okay, I think that makes sense. And I think the other thing that's really important, it was never as apparent, is the ability for individuals in the community to cooperate and support each other. With all the divisiveness and the, you know, competitiveness between who's right and who's wrong versus what can we all do together, really build a community back to having a a common cause or a common reason for supporting it. And then, you're kind of starting out on the ground floor, but there's tremendous uh, amounts of capital that are resting in the hands of major players who can deploy it at a moment's notice. The capital is there. Does the justification show up? And whether it's, we talked in the past of the SBA, and they have tools and access to lending or supporting lending. Then you have major institutions like Chase or JP Morgan, or on and on and on. And then you have, companies like Ford and, everything. What I liked about that project is the chairman of Ford, who spearheaded it, had a self-interest in it, because Ford Motor and General Motors and Chrysler, who are located out in Michigan, they need to continue to attract the best and the brightest, right? So, and he said the two things that we find are most in demand for especially workers who are young and want to get going is they need to have something that's challenging for them to do, makes them want to get in there and do something important, and having a environment that supports it. So if you have, and what they did is they created a 30-acre park around it, kind of made it onto itself, and then next to it, which they already built before this new facility opened up, was a pretty much a place for businesses to get their start, whether it was like an incubator or whether it was whatever. So they had the big company who was going to employ 5,000 people in this facility. And next door had 500 individual businesses who signed on, and there's a waiting list to get into this development group. And, my son went to UNLV and actually got a degree in the hospitality industry. And if you look at the two biggest schools in hospitality, it's Cornell, which is in New Jersey, and UNLV, which is in Vegas. Why? Because they got New York City and Atlantic City, and they require cooks and service people and managers, and the same thing in Vegas. Without that school, they wouldn't have the feeder coming in that they can get new leadership on an ongoing business. So, and I guess other schools are like that too. If you take Baltimore, Johns Hopkins is the biggest employer in the state. And they're going to continue to attract some of the people who want to be the best doctors. I guess the question is, after you got your degree in Johns Hopkins and Baltimore, do you go back to Corpus Christi or Phoenix, or do you make a life in Baltimore? And I think that's something that almost has to be an extension to the education, is the reasons to stay here, because, to bring people, and it's the same thing goes for people from other countries who come here, learn from the best, and then go back to wherever they came from. It's a benefit to them. But how does that support the people who are supporting those types of institutions? And I think you really need people with some vision, people who have a long-term approach. The challenge in government is you never know who's going to get elected. You don't know how long they're going to stay. You don't know how they're going to stick to their word and not just make it a campaign promise and find out there was nothing there. I think what all businesses can agree on is they like stability. They like to have something they know they can depend on, whether it's the laws, whether it's the taxation. In a lot of cases, you cut up something good to support something bad, right? And that's usually the case. That companies who do a great job have to subsidize companies who don't, and people the same way. So I guess the diversity, the complexity of it makes it real challenging, and it really takes someone who could kind of thread the needle and put something together that at the minimum justifies the effort, because we're not just talking about money, we're talking about thought, we're talking about time, we're talking about people who could be funding other things in different ways. So how do you encourage that? I know a lot of communities have tax benefits because at least that's a return. In other words, if you do this, you'll get this. Doesn't matter how good your song and dance is. If you create 100 jobs that stick there, or people that buy houses there, well, then there's a direct relationship. And I guess there has to be alignment between what is good for the business, what is good for the community, and what is good for the people involved in the business and community. And if you can build that better picture of tomorrow, you're not only going to get people who come from out of wherever they're at, but start to engage in higher paying, higher skilled jobs. So if you can just optimize where someone's making $12 an hour, and now for some a little bit of training can make $25 or $30 an hour, you don't have to change the numbers, you just have to change the value of the numbers. So I got to applaud you, Karl, because this seems like a Goliath type of project. But obviously, there you have a lot of people interested in learning and hearing about it, because if you take away all the noise, there are really good quality people who believe in their community, want to see their community thrive. And I guess, developing a sense of pride makes a difference too. When people see streets that have businesses open and people are adding value versus being afraid to drive into some areas or walk through certain areas. I guess there is a lot of, chicken and egg here, which goes first and why. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the sense of community pride is going to be central to everything we do. When you're in an underserved community, a distressed economic community, quite often what you see is a kind of a sense of pessimism, a sense of being left out, frustration, because they are missing out on all the opportunities that they see happening in other communities. And so at that point, what tends to do is that you get an amplification of that, because everybody's going, well, I got to survive. So they start thinking more about themselves and less about themselves as a member of a community. And so as we start in a project in a community, we have to start with the statement that we want this tide to raise all boats in the community. We want everybody to benefit. The definition of economic development is an improvement in the quality of life for a community, for the area that's being served. And to get people to rethink, to put in a new state of mind that, oh, I'm no longer in a distressed community. I'm now in an opportunity area. I'm in an area that can thrive, and I can have a future, and my kids and grandkids can have a future. All this is dependent upon having a plan, though, that is designed and fit to that community so that people can see their role, and they can see, most importantly, how they benefit as a community instead of thinking of themselves as an individual or an individual business. And by doing that, now you basically build hope into the community, which I don't want to lean on too much because it's got to have an economic infrastructure underneath of it, or the hope is maybe falsely placed. But if we come at it from that direction where we try to create this sense of equality across the board, a sense of it's your turn, we can get you back on your feet. You all have to work together. You can't just stand and watch this passively. We're not going to pick winners in some ways. In other ways, we are, because we don't have all the money for everyone all the time. So we're going to put some discrete investments in the community in a way that we hope can then become a magnet for more money and to allow this to grow, and kind of put them back to the origin of the community. Why were you here to start with? Well, we had these jobs, and we had people come to fill the jobs, and houses and storefronts to serve the people in the community. We're just going to go back to the beginning and restart that whole storyline, and do it in a way where today we're in a different world with different markets and different ways of communicating. So it won't be like we did it before, but it will have hopefully the same outcome.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, thinking now of migration, you take a state like California, that people are leaving in droves, because of the taxes, but because of situations that may not be as attractive to other people. And then you've got states like Texas and Florida that are stepping up, that don't have, in some cases, even a state income tax. There's some states don't even have sales tax, if you can believe that. I think there's about 7 states. Obviously, they get their money from somewhere else. So it's no free ride. And typically, those states usually depend on property taxes or some other taxes. I know in Detroit, when I was growing up, it was $30 or so for license plates. Didn't matter what kind of car you had. Coming to Colorado, it was a different thing, where now it's a percentage of the value of the car. Naturally, if you're in Detroit, you want people buying big cars, new cars, expensive cars. If you slap a big license plate fee on it, it's going to discourage that. So, there are industries that certain states are dependent on or known for, and they're going to do whatever they can to maintain those. But there's this underground community of businesses, maybe a gray market, you might call it, that, or people with their side hustles. And maybe some of that, when you look at it, isn't so bad, is some of these people are making real money, not really paying a lot of tax, but it's what they can do and what they can generate income. Because ultimately, unless you're at a position, most everything that most working people make gets spent, and usually gets spent in greater amounts than anything else. So when you fuel, or when you prime the pump and you put money in people's hands, it's going to go right back into the community. There's an additional benefit. Again, how much do you got to give to how much do you have to see? And I think it's too complicated to have one direct course as there used to be, where the government could step in and make it happen because they had money. And, again, we can go into deficit. We can go into how much is being spent on interest, how much real money is investable versus how much is collected and then distributed. And people want to see success stories. Just like if you're an investor, you want to get the low-hanging fruit. You want to get the belief, because confidence goes so much further. I mean, even if we talk about the stock market, there is no relationship between stock price today and value per se, especially if you're talking about companies that aren't meat and potatoes, the ones that are more smoke and mirrors. You take these meme stocks, right? And all of a sudden they're 200 yesterday and they're 12 today. And then they go back to 200 tomorrow. And all it is a speculative escalator ride And what I learned, or not had to learn, because I always know people are speculating, and I know a guy 2 weeks ago made 50,000 bucks one night on Nvidia or whatever you call it. And a very smart guy. He's got algorithms and who knows what else. But was there really $50,000 worth of value that day? No, he got in at the right time, was smart enough to cash out at the right time so he could actually secure that. But it's not duplicatable, and it's actually a lottery ticket that won't be supportive long term. So, uh, and now there's even more instruments, you know, when you start pooling assets, when you start moving money, someone could come in tomorrow and it does change the marketplace. Again, what we're talking about is more at the grassroots. The person open up a coffee shop for the first time, and then what's the availability of labor? What's the cost of labor? In some places, labor is pretty inexpensive, especially if you don't have a lot of unionization, a lot of intermediaries that take a piece of this and a piece of that by the time it gets to where it belongs. But, because things are changing, it's just being on the right side of the tracks, to know where the movement is, where the movement's going, and position yourself. I guess what would benefit you is after your first test market, if you had enough markets to really see what it did in different situations, and how that could affect all of them. When they came up with self-driving cars, they're still coming up with it. Is that what I heard that made sense is if you drive a car and get into an accident, you remember and learn from that accident, but it's just you and the other party. When a million cars are on the road and they're picking up data and everything else, and they're upgrading their, let's say, software to incorporate, oh, this was never anticipated. Now a million cars and drivers learn at the same time. So if one can get the knowledge share, I was talking to somebody, and I know you were mentioning too, about creating an academy, right? Where you can learn as you go from other people who might have done it already or are doing it. Well, that's an extra value because everybody wants to see something get built in that kind of optimizes itself by itself over time from the experience, from the success stories, because success stories stick. And hopefully those get duplicatable and scalable and take the place, because I think that's where early on still does, and Harvey's the guy to talk to, is franchising, right? Created here's what you do, here's how you do it, here's how you make your hamburger every day, and blah, blah, blah. And now all you got to do is execute, where everybody who has a certain style or a certain way of doing things, it is hard to, duplicate that way. So what have you started to see a change in how you feel about what you're doing now that you've had more input, more conversations with more people, that make this more make you more confident about going forward and communicating this?
Well, one of the things that we realized fairly early on as we were starting to create a template for the first community we're going to work with is that the hyper focus on that community was going to serve to exclude everyone who didn't live in that community, whether it's intentional or not. And we do need funding to come in from outside the community. We're not certain at what level, whether it's going to be the majority of the money or maybe the minority of the money, but we do need outside money. So we have to figure out how to benefit anyone who has a similar situation immediately. And that's where the concept of the academy is coming forward within our plan. We're expanding the plan to say we're going to provide information, education, on what we're doing and how we're doing it to anyone who has an interest, so that they don't have to wait 2 years or 4 years before we might get to a point where we could see and work with their community. We have an automatic inherent limitation on how many communities we can work with. So we're going to have to get to a point as quickly as possible where do-it-yourself kits are made available to a community leader who wants to help their community, because they don't want to wait 2 or 4 years. It's like in COVID, where you tell a kid, "Well, sorry, you went to high school, but you don't get to go to graduation, and you don't get to play football your senior year." The world keeps moving, whether we want to or not, and we have to recognize that there are people in underserved communities who don't want to remain in underserved communities, and if we have a better mousetrap that they can build themselves without waiting for us to build it with them, then they can move now and they can start working to improve their communities now. So this is probably the most major change we've made since we started down this path, was trying to anticipate how we could share this information that we already have, the templates we're already building today, and get them out there. And then we have to make that a sustainable element of our entire enterprise. So we're into some things there. So we might look into the LinkedIn Live online courseware that they do. Maybe we can qualify to sell some of our courses through LinkedIn. Um, we may be doing online webinars. We may be creating other state-of-the-art tools that make use of AI to accelerate the transmission and ingestion of all this knowledge. But a lot of work yet to go, but we're ready to get started. So we're wrapping up our first tier business plan. We're going to go seek some seed funding for our first demonstration project. But the thing's trying to grow on us on its own, as we try to also address everybody else who has a need for what we're trying to build, and figure out how can we best accommodate this massive need immediately.
Well, that's terrific. And I'm so happy we had this conversation. And I believe our conversations are getting more, uh, they're getting deeper and richer as relates to specific areas that aren't discussed that often, or kind of glossed over. And I do see how one can leverage what's already there in so many different ways, especially like LinkedIn. Because, again, Harvey's kind of led the way with taking franchising and really building its visibility, but more importantly, its interaction with the people already doing it. And something like community funding could be the magnet for many different segments. Could be all the economic development managers throughout the country whose job is to make sure Detroit or Denver is competitive and really building for the future, as well as businesses, as well as individuals, and as well as support vehicles, whether it's staffing, consulting, coaching, really having that hub where it brings everything together in a way that isn't brought together in most everything. It's a part of something, but it's not standalone on its own, but it's big enough to do that. So that's a challenge we have as newscasters, in a sense. I don't, maybe even newsmakers to a point. But I thought this was a lot richer, a lot deeper, and I think that's kind of the course we're going to be taking. So with that said, want to thank the audience, want to thank Karl. Karl and me will be back on Wednesday. Karl will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Mountain. For those who want to continue to really focus and lean into what Karl's doing, what Karl's leadership and thoughts and insights can benefit so many others, but also attract their involvement. So this is not just projecting out, but it's interacting together that I see a huge benefit. So thank you, audience. Come back tomorrow. Tomorrow's subject will be well-being, since we have Beverly, who's a therapist, and Miriam, who's an MD. And so if you have questions about that, but more importantly, if you want to get to see some people you haven't seen, get to know things maybe you want to learn about, and, also bring anything to the table that's been something you want an answer to, or at least build a discussion around. So thank you very much. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Karl, any last thoughts or words?
No, happy to have the discussion. Lots more work yet to go.
Well, to be continued then. So look
Yes.
for 2.0